is a motion filed by Ms. Smith on behalf of Mr. Campbell for placement of the children.
Ursula Rush and Alyssa Wood for the department ready. I'd also ask the court to ask anyone who's not speaking to mute because I'm getting a lot of noise.
Amy Smith, attorney for David Campbell. He's present. We're ready.
Tiffany Feller, attorney for respondent mother Nikki Brown. We are both present and ready.
Jordan Barron, attorney ad litem for the children. I'm ready.
Rebecca Navarro-Costa.
Thank you. I'll call Rachel Tate.
You may proceed, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Judge. Rachel, can you just start by telling us who you are and how you know my client, Mr. Campbell?
My name is Rachel Tate. I'm a friend of the Campbell family.
Okay. You're not actually related to Mr. Campbell, correct?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. It's a small town though, so you don't know for sure that you're not related to him. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you known Mr. Campbell?
A little over 3 years.
Okay. And do you know other members of his family for a longer amount of time?
Yes. I know some of the cousins for over 10 years and his sister for about 4.
Okay. And what's his sister's name?
Annie.
Okay. Is it through Annie and other cousins that you got to know Mr. Campbell and Nikki, as well as Ava and Lucas?
Yes. At parties or at visiting their house when our kids were playing, or when his, there was a cousin who was placed with us for a little while last year and she went home.
A cousin of Ava and Lucas was placed in your home?
Yes.
They were placed by CPS, correct?
Yes.
You've had at least some contact with both Ava and Lucas. Can you tell us a little bit about that contact?
Well, when they've been with family and or when we've been at parties, just interacting with them, playing and talking to them. And a couple of times I've needed to give David a ride over for his visits, and I've seen them a little bit and interacted at like the park, gotten to say hi again.
Okay. And so the times that you're talking about seeing them at events, that was prior to this removal, correct?
Correct. Like nobody has really seen them since the removal that happened in like March when they were moved to this placement.
So when you're saying no one else has seen them, you're saying that they haven't participated in like family birthday parties. They haven't been able to be at any holidays, things like that, correct?
Correct.
Objection. I'll withdraw.
Before we get into the actual home study, I just want to talk a little bit about yourself. Are you married?
Yes.
How long have you been married?
Like 17 years.
Okay. And you have some biological children as well as an adopted child in your home, is that correct?
Yes, I have 4 biological children, and we just completed our adoption last month for our 5th child that lives at home with us. We also have 6 adult children and some grandchildren, like 5.
That's a lot. Tell us about the children that are currently living in your home, just very briefly, like names and ages and a little bit about what they do.
The oldest at home right now is Isaac. He's 15. He's and our daughter Chloe, who's 13. They're involved in like 4-H. We homeschool, and we belong to some homeschool co-ops that the kids go and do extracurricular activities with, like art, and we go on field trips with them, and to do more outside academic classes that they want to participate in with our homeschool group. And then we have 2 9-year-old boys, a set of twins, and they just like to have fun and build with Legos.
Are they also homeschooled?
Yes.
Okay.
And Josie is 5, or she'll be 5 next month. She's 4 right now. She goes to a Wii school and participates with the homeschool co-op. And they just like to have fun.
Okay. And then your husband lives in the home too, correct?
Yes.
Any other adults in the home?
No.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your education. Are you currently your working history. Are you currently working?
No, not at this time. I have a bachelor's degree in sociology. I worked in like social work jobs out of college, like battered women's shelter and emergency shelters at like Buckner's Children's Home. And then I went into working with in MHMR. I've been caseworkers in those fields. And then when Isaac was born, he had some disability. And so like I kind of took leave from the workforce because we weren't sure what all his care would include. And like he's seen specialists and been to lots of doctors, and he's just kind of gotten to the age and the point where that's kind of slowed down.
Sustained. And I will just note for everybody, this hearing is only set for an hour. The court has a 2:30 hearing.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
And Your Honor, you've taken judicial notice. The department has no objection to you taking specific notice of the home study that was filed.
Any objection, Ms. Fowler?
Not of the home study itself, no.
Any objection, Ms. Barron?
No objection.
Any objection, Ms. Smith?
No, Your Honor.
The court will take specific notice of the home study filed on the Tate family.
I have a little bit of a lag on my sound, so I'm sorry if I'm weird in my questioning here. Ms. Tate, are you aware that Ava and Lucas both participate in therapies?
Yes.
In particular, Lucas goes to therapy at least 3 times a week in Graham. If the children were to be placed with you, would you be able and willing to maintain his current therapy schedule in Graham?
Yes.
What about any therapies that Ava is currently participating in? Would you be able to continue those? Are you willing and able to do that?
Yes.
And one of the children that you have that you've recently adopted, Josie, she was in CPS care previously, correct?
Yes, for almost 5 years.
And so is it fair to say through that experience and your past work experience that you're familiar with CPS and the requirements of what you may have to do in order to make sure the children attend any type of doctor's visits, visits with their therapists, visits with their parents, etc.?
Yes.
And that can sometimes be a lot. Would you agree?
Yes.
And are you fully prepared to do that, whatever that may entail?
Yes.
Along the same lines, even though you have a relationship with Mr. Campbell and some of his family, do you understand that if that if the judge were to place the children with you, you would be under strict requirements regarding who could have contact with the children?
Yes.
And do you believe that you could follow any policies put in place by CPS or the court?
Yes.
How often do you actually see Mr. Campbell at this point?
He works a lot, so not very often. I mean, like maybe once a month or so.
Okay. So do you think it would be a problem to, do you think you would have any issue keeping him away from the children if that were necessary?
No.
Same for Nikki or anyone else in the family. Do you feel the same way?
Right. I feel the same way because I'd want to do what's, best for the kids and their safety.
Okay. As far as your actual home goes, where do you plan to have Ava and Lucas sleep if they were placed with you?
Ava would share a room with my daughters, Josie and Chloe, and then Lucas could share a room with the twins, Sam and Levi.
And would you have any issues with providing their own bed? Oftentimes, well, you can answer that. Any issues with providing a bed for the children?
No.
And oftentimes when children are placed, they don't have a lot of belongings like clothes and toys and things like that. Would you be able to provide all those things for the children if necessary?
Yes.
There's some concerns brought up in a previous hearing and also in the home study that the judge has taken judicial notice of regarding how it would affect the compliance of your household and if it would still be in compliance with minimum standards. Is that something you've already thought about?
Yes, I've talked to our placement agency. We're under an adoption license, so it's a different standard than the foster. And so we wouldn't be out of compliance.
Okay. So in particular, taking a sibling group in of 2 would not change anything about your current situation, not negatively affect that, correct?
No, it wouldn't negatively affect our situation.
If it is determined by counselor or the judge in this case that it is in the best interest of the children to maintain a relationship with their current placement, the Rioses, would you be willing and able to do that?
Yes, if it was determined that that was appropriate for them.
Do you think it's in their children's best interest to be placed in your home?
Yes, because they've lost ties or are being displaced from their family. And those connections are being lost with their siblings and their cousins and their grandparents and aunts and uncles. And studies show that kids that have that connection do
Objection,
better.
hearsay, and outside her field of expertise.
Sustained.
Ms. Tate, we already talked a little bit about your education. She has a bachelor's in sociology, correct?
Yes,
You have a history of how many years working as a social worker?
it was about 3 years in the social work field to start with, and then 3 years with battered women and children, and then 5 years in MHMR.
Okay. Do you believe that that education experience allows you to have an opinion or state your opinion regarding things like what is in a child's best interest based on studies, what studies have shown?
Yes, I try to keep current on like information coming out on like child development as far as being a parent, even like what's good for them. And we have kids that were from divorced homes with my first marriage, and like how kids like studies on how those kids fare in life. And then as with Josie, trying to keep current on what studies and things are showing with kids from adoptive and fostering.
Okay. And so without going into details about the actual studies, the opinion that you have about what is in the children's best interest, is it partly based on all those things you just discussed?
Yes, partly.
And is it also based on your personal knowledge of the situation of these children in this family?
Yes.
If the children were to be placed with you, would you be in a place to allow the children to have contact with their half siblings?
Yes. If it's allowed by court.
Sure. What about cousins, aunts, uncles, things like that?
Yes. I'd want to follow also like the guidelines of what's allowed by the state and the court.
If their parents are not allowed contact, you've already discussed how you could be okay with that. But if the parents were allowed some kind of contact in the future, you'd be willing and able to facilitate that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about before the kids came into care. You said that you were having some contact with them on occasion, correct?
Yes.
Were you seeing them with their parents or were you seeing them with other family members?
Usually with other family members.
Okay.
Or at like family function, and like I think David was there one time,
Okay.
like birthday party.
Before the removal occurred, did you have any indication or any concerns regarding the children and them being in the care of their parents?
Objection as to relevancy.
Your Honor, I was just,
Ms. Smith, do you have a response?
thank you. I'm just trying to get to her ability to recognize signs that might be necessary given the history of this case.
I won't object then. I'll withdraw my objection.
You may answer that, Ms. Tate.
Since I wasn't around them a lot, I would just I guess maybe hear how things were going with them from family members. And in a small town, sometimes it's rumor and then sometimes it's not. So just, I guess, seeing kind of like how they were doing in their life as far as work and how they were getting along in life was how I could see what was going on with them, since it wasn't a lot of close contact.
Okay, so I think I understand your answer is based on the little bit of contact you had with the actual parents, you did not see any concern before removal. Is that fair to say?
Right. There wasn't anything that was like outstanding to me
Okay,
because of the lack of a lot of contact.
right. And are you aware or have you had conversations with Mr. Campbell regarding what this case is about? Why the
Yes.
children? And do you feel like you have a good understanding of that at this point?
Yes.
And if in the future, no matter the situation, as far as parental rights being intact or not, do you feel like you would be able to recognize signs of drug use, methamphetamine use in particular, regarding the parents?
Yes, I believe so.
And what are your thoughts or what is your opinion about whether or not parents should have contact with their children while actively using methamphetamines?
I don't feel like they should be under the influence around their kids.
And if you were ever to find Mr. Campbell or Miss Brown under the influence, would you be protective of the children at that point?
Yes.
Does the same go for anyone else in their family that might that might be a concern for?
Yes.
So while we've spent a lot of time talking about how important it is to keep family connections, is it fair to say that that is tempered by making sure that those people are appropriate?
Right. The kids' safety needs to be the forefront of the concern in any situation.
All right, thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Thank you. Ms. Tate, you have 10 biological children and 1 adopted, correct?
I have 8 biological, 2 adopted, and 2 stepdaughters and 1 adopted.
Okay. So who's your stepdaughters?
Destiny and Mackenzie.
Okay. Can you tell me if you know why John, is it pronounced Vallis?
Yes.
Vallis. Why John Vallis, who is your son, not only did not respond to this request for information in your home study, but didn't respond to the previous one for Josie, now known as Josie, previously known as Aziza?
No, I don't know if he didn't.
When's the last time you had contact with him?
This last week when he came in from Michigan.
And while we're talking about Josie, formerly known as Aziza, isn't it true that after the mother's rights were terminated and it went to an appeal and it had to be redone, you were allowing Vanessa to have at least virtual contact with Aziza and not telling the department?
No, it was set up through her caseworker and visitation.
No, I'm not talking about prior to the termination. I'm talking about after, when it was discovered, when Vanessa testified at the de novo hearing and Miranda called you and said you were letting her have visits, ?
She had 1 virtual visit with her mom, and it was said that after termination, it was up to me to decide about that.
And exactly who told you that? Because I'm pretty sure it wasn't CPS.
It was her caseworker.
Isn't it true that you told her caseworker when Miranda called you at the de novo that you had no idea you couldn't do that, and in fact you thought it would offer closure for Vanessa?
No.
When was the last time prior to the removal, which I believe is either the end of February 2022 or the beginning of March 2022, that you saw the children? Prior to February the 28th, 2022.
About a week before they were removed.
So you didn't notice that Lucas was was being exposed to marijuana and to meth?
When they were removed from the parents was different from when I
Objection,
saw.
non-responsive.
Sustained.
My question is, 1 week before the removal, did you not notice that Lucas was being exposed to meth?
Your Honor, I don't know if this witness is qualified to answer this question if she saw the child on a random basis. She wasn't living with the child.
She said,
It's a different time period. I'm talking about a different
Just
removal.
one moment. I'm going to overrule the objection. She testified that she had seen the children 1 week prior to removal. And my understanding from the question is it was into that 1 week time frame. Is that correct, Ms. Rush?
yes, ma'am, and she's testified she would notice.
Thank
And
you.
Ms. Tate, I'm going to ask you again. Now, Ms. Tate, the children were removed February the 28th, 2022. Did you see the children the week before?
Not the week before their initial removal. I saw them at their voluntary placement before they were moved to the current placement.
Okay. I am talking February the 28th, 2022. How much before that day did you see the children?
It would have been months before that removal date.
Okay, so how many times exactly have you seen Lucas? For at least, let's say, at least 30 minutes at a time, not waving to him from the car.
Probably about 4 times before that for an extended period.
And how many times Ava?
Probably about 6.
And what is Lucas's birthday?
May, like about 17th,
What year?
2018.
Okay, I'm looking.
I mean,
When is Ava's?
I'm sorry, his is 2020 and Ava's is 2018, March 27th.
Okay, his is actually May 10th, 2020. So that means you've seen him a total of 4 times, and he's almost 3 years old. 3 years old, and you've seen her a total of 6 times, and she is over 5. Does that sound right?
About that, because
Okay,
we're not allowed
now,
to put them
wait a
outside.
minute. Objection.
Wait, while we're talking over each other, I'm trying to record this. I need you to let Ms. Rush ask the question, and then Ms. Tate, you can answer, and Ms. Rush, I need you to let Ms. Tate answer.
Yes, ma'am. So are you aware that Lucas tested positive for meth when he was removed?
Yes,
And you're aware that they both tested positive for marijuana?
yes,
You also aware that Lucas had bottle rot in his mouth?
no,
And were you aware that he's also delayed?
it's possible. He was pretty young the last time.
Are you also aware that these relatives that you've talked about, as far as I know, none of them have come forward and asked for visits? Are you aware of that?
No,
Are you also aware that when Mr. Campbell filled out his child caregiver resource form, whatever day he filled it out, I'm sorry, I have it in front of me, but I can't find it. You weren't on it.
I'm just gonna object to clarify which one she's talking about because he has filled out more than one.
The first one he filled out.
I'm aware I wasn't on the first one.
And I also noticed in your home study report, you say that Mr. Campbell is not a bad guy. He just needs lots of support and is making poor choices and needs to stay away from Ms. Brown. Do you remember saying that?
That was an answer from some conversations we had.
Did it ever dawn on you that maybe Mr. Campbell is a bad guy and he does use drugs and maybe Ms. Brown needs to stay away from him?
that's somebody's opinion. It's their opinion.
Okay.
Sorry, what, Ms. Smith?
Objected to argumentative.
Overruled.
Are you aware that Ms. Brown and Mr. Campbell are in an on and off again relationship?
Yes,
So if it was months before the February 2022 removal that you saw the children, can you give me a month?
it was probably October or November.
October or November, obviously 2021.
Yes, ma'am.
And at that time, Lucas would have been about 18 months old. Does that sound about right?
No,
He'd have been about 2 years old.
a little over one. Yes,
He was born in May 2020, and in November 2021, he'd have been about 18 months old. Sound right?
yes,
And Ava would have been about 3.5.
yes.
Have you requested to see them since then?
At least once, but I haven't been allowed.
When?
Last month.
Okay, was that the first time?
Yes, because I wasn't.
Okay,
aware.
objection. Non-responsive.
Sustained.
When you talk about half siblings, where are the half siblings?
In Breckenridge and like Corpus Christi.
And do you know who is the parent to those children?
David is the parent to the one in Corpus Christi, and Nikki is the parent to the 3 in Breckenridge.
And the one in Corpus Christi, isn't it true that his rights have been terminated and that child's been adopted?
No,
Okay, wasn't sure. How about the ones in Breckenridge?
I'm unsure.
And how often do you personally see the child in Corpus?
I don't.
How many times do you personally see the children in Breckenridge?
Occasionally at school events.
How often do you see them when you're specifically seeing them, not seeing them at a school event?
I don't specifically see them
Okay.
because
So who are you closest to in Mr. Campbell's family?
a cousin.
Who lives in Breckenridge?
No, she moved last year.
To where?
Port Lavaca.
I understand what your CPA has told you. Do you understand that if this judge places these children with you, one, under the Texas Admin Code 26, Section 749.2551, you will not be eligible for any assistance, coupled with the fact that the department is not agreeing to it, so you get no money from the department. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you also understand that if you adopt, you will not be able to adopt through the department?
Okay.
Did you understand that before I asked you?
No.
When I'm looking at your household budget, I don't see, are you getting any money, subsidy for the child now known as Josie?
Yes, it just started.
Did you not get anything when you were a foster placement for her?
But for the first 18 months,
And then it stopped because of whatever bureaucracy there is, right?
the fictive kin or the kinship placement only goes for so long.
So whatever
And then
the thing is.
Mhm.
And I know you said, but how old is are the children who would be rooming with Ava?
one is 15 and one is 4.
And the 15 and the 4-year-old currently share a room, right?
Yes.
Okay, this has Chloe's birthday is at 2019. Is that not
Oh,
correct?
she's
2009.
13. Sorry.
She's how old?
13. Sorry.
Okay. And then the age of the children who Lucas would be sharing a room with.
9.
And are those the twin boys?
Yes.
Are you also aware that the current placement has had these children in their home for over a year?
Yes,
Are you also aware that they too are considered fictive kin because of prior placement?
I know one of them, they are.
Um, Are you aware of the other types of therapy Lucas has to have?
Yes.
What are they?
Play therapy and speech therapy.
Got anything else?
If he's delayed, he probably has occupational therapy and
But you don't know. You just assume that because I told you he was delayed, not because you knew he was delayed, correct?
yes,
Also, are you aware that his therapies are about 12 times a month, all in Graham?
okay, yes,
Were you aware of that before I asked you if you were aware of that?
yes.
Who told you?
I read it in a report, I believe.
Who gave you a report?
David,
When's the last time you talked to David about this?
about what?
About you being placement?
We talked about it yesterday.
And what did David tell you about wanting you to be placement?
That they'd like me to be placement so the kids could be closer to their family.
Okay. Who's they?
Ava and Lucas.
No, you said they want them. So was Nikki involved in this conversation?
Not the one I talked to David yesterday.
Okay. Have you spoken to Nikki and David together about doing a placement?
When I've given them a ride to like their visits.
And when was the last time you did that?
Before the last court hearing where their visits were separated.
Who first approached you about being placement?
David,
Did you bring it up or did he?
actually, I think his sister and I talked about it whenever.
Okay, so you and Annie discussed you being placement for Ava and Lucas, and then you brought it up to David?
No,
Okay,
David
I'm sorry.
asked me about it.
Did David tell you he asked you about it because he talked to Annie?
I don't remember.
Did David bring it up to you after you had spoken to Annie about it?
Yes,
Do you remember approximately when that was that you spoke to Annie?
probably
Your Honor, I'm gonna
February of
object to
22.
relevance at this point.
Just a moment. Everybody's talking over each other. Ms. Fowler?
I don't see how this is relevant. My objection is relevance.
Ms. Rush?
Your Honor, I think it's relevant as to who actually wanted this placement and when.
I'm going to
And why?
overrule the objection. You may answer that, Ms. Tate.
Can you give me an approximate? I'm not going to ask you for a date and time, just an approximate time when Annie brought it up to you. Oh, wait a minute. Or did you bring it up to Annie?
I did not bring it up to Annie.
So Annie brought it up to you. Give me an approximate time.
It would have been February of 22.
So you and Annie talked about it basically at the removal.
Whenever.
Your Honor, my objection at this point is hearsay. We're talking about what she talked about with a non-party so that, seriously.
I'm going to sustain that.
So just without telling me exactly, did you and Annie speak about it in about the time of the removal?
Yes,
Okay. So when did you and David first speak about it?
I would say it was like April or so of last year.
2022?
Yes,
And you said you're the one, he's the one who brought it up.
yes.
Pass the witness.
Ms. Fowler?
I'll pass the witness. I have no questions.
Ms. Barron?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Tate, you said that the last time that you saw the children was about a week before they were moved to the Rios home. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, so at that time, they were in the relative placement with Mr. Campbell's parents, is that right?
Yes.
And are you aware that that placement was busted because the Campbells were allowing unauthorized persons to provide care for the children?
I was aware that the grandmother was in the hospital and that the children's aunts were watching them.
And were you aware that the children's aunt had a significant CPS history as well as reported drug use?
One of them,
Are you also aware that Mr. Campbell, the father of the children, was living on the same property as that placement?
no.
You stated also that you provided rides for the parents to visit. About how often did you do that?
About with David, about 5 times or so. And then Nikki came to about 2 or 3 of those.
Okay. And were your children in the same vehicle when you were providing rides for the parents to their visitation?
My 15-year-old went a couple of times when it was just David.
And is that it?
Yes.
I'll pass witness.
Ms. Smith, do you have any further witnesses?
Yes, I'll call Alyssa. Thank you. Alyssa, when did you get assigned this case?
About the middle of January.
So when you took over the case, did you have a chance to read over the history and become familiar with everything that's happened in the case?
Yes, for the most part.
And so you're aware that David actually asked for placement with Miss Tate back in November. Do you recall that?
Yes, just reading through the documentation.
And a home study was completed back in December for Miss Tate. Is that correct?
Yes.
But nothing was filed with the court regarding a disposition denying or approving the home study until it was ordered by the court to do so in March. Is that correct?
Yes.
So also, is it also fair to say that there were no safety concerns noted in the home study for Miss Tate?
Not noted, no.
Okay. And so the reasons listed under the disposition denial are basically that it might affect her eligibility, which we've already addressed, correct?
Yes.
That you guys were worried about her being able to take Lucas to all of his therapies, correct?
Yes.
And she's testified today that she's able to take care of those and is willing and able to do that. You heard that testimony, correct?
Yes.
So that is no longer a concern. Would you agree?
No. I would agree. It's not a concern.
Okay. And you've also heard her testify that she's willing to maintain a relationship with the Rios if determined by the therapist to be necessary. Did you hear that?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe that addresses the concern about the Rios family?
For the most part, yes.
And then just quickly, do you have any idea what took so long from the time a home study was actually conducted for us to get a result or a disposition?
I don't.
Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Alyssa, are you concerned about the comment I talked to Ms. Tate about, that Mr. Campbell's a good guy, he just needs support and needs to not hang out with Nikki?
Yes.
Regarding your review of all of this, did you see at any point prior to last month, Ms. Tate asking for visits with these children?
No, I do not recall that.
Do you not recall it because you don't remember, or do you not recall it because it wasn't there?
I don't recall it ever being there.
Are you aware of the department's plan for these children?
Yes.
And is it adoption by non-relatives?
Yes.
And are the children currently placed with a fictive kin and have been there for about 13 months?
Yes.
And is it the department's plan for that fictive kin to adopt?
Yes.
Is that fictive kin well aware and making the appointments they're supposed to make?
Yes.
Do you have concerns regarding the counseling as well as the school placement for the children, without going into what they've said, but what you've learned? Does that concern you regarding any kind of movement?
It would concern me if that was moved. Yes.
I understand that Ms. Tate testified what her CPA told her about the number of children. However, is that not your understanding about how the number of children works?
Correct.
Do you have to request a variance, but there's no guarantee the variance will be granted?
Yes.
And is it also your understanding that if children are placed without department approval, there is no foster money, there is no subsidy, and there is no adoption through the department?
Yes.
Do you think it's in the best interest of Ava and Lucas to move from a home they've lived at for 13 months to live with someone who knew them 6 times or so before the removal?
No.
When you looked at everything all the other people did, okay, did you find any notations showing that from February 2022 until November 2022, Mr. Campbell, Ms. Brown, or Ms. Tate had asked for a home stay?
No, I didn't see a specific date.
For Ms. Tate?
For Ms.
Were you surprised to find out today that at the time of the removal, Ms. Tate was already speaking to someone about a home study
Yes.
or a placement?
Yes.
And were you surprised to find out today that in April of 2022, Ms. Tate spoke to Mr. Campbell about being placed with these children?
Yes.
Pass the witness.
Ms. Fowler?
Thank you. Ms. Wood, is it department policy to allow non-relatives to visit with children who are in care?
If it's approved,
I mean,
it's not standard. No.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your answer. Go ahead and say that again.
It's not like a standard policy. It's not part of our visitation usually.
And so you heard Ms. Tate testify that she'd been involved with CPS previously for approximately 5 years for a kiddo she just adopted, correct?
Yes.
So is it possible that she already knew that and that's why she didn't ask to visit?
Yes.
Now, with regards to the question about Mr. Campbell and he's a bad person, I mean, do good people do bad things sometimes?
Yes.
And so, I mean, I guess what makes a person bad in your opinion? Because you said that you were concerned that she said that he was a good person who just makes bad choices.
And what makes somebody bad would be continually making wrong decisions after being, I guess, guided in a way to make good decisions, but they continually choose to do the opposite.
Okay, so that makes somebody bad. Okay. Now, are you aware that department policy actually places placement with relatives and fictive kin above placement with former foster parents?
Yes.
But in this particular case, I believe y'all explored relative placements, but weren't given any fictive kin options. Is that correct?
It was my understanding that this placement currently was a fictive kin for one of the children, but I didn't explore any of those options myself.
Okay, well, you're aware that department policy treats them different. It has different for placement options. It has relatives and fictive kin and then former foster. So it separates them out. You're aware of that, correct? And so if you're looking at placing,
I'm sorry, Ms. Wood, I didn't get your answer on that.
Oh, I said yes. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Apologize, Ms. Fowler.
no, thank you. And I apologize. I know this was asked, but I didn't hear the answer. When you first saw the first entry in the records after you reviewed them upon becoming the caseworker, that one of the parents asked for Ms. Tate to be considered as a placement. When did you say that was?
I read a documentation dated around the 23rd of November in 2022.
Do you have a notation in the file when a subsequent child placement resource form was received from either parent that had Ms. Tate's name on it?
I can't recall it off the top of my head, but I can go through the documentation.
Well, do you recall if it was around the November 23rd date where you saw the entry, or if it was before or after or whatever?
I don't.
I'll pass the witness, Judge.
Ms. Barron.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Wood, there was some testimony by Ms. Tate about different things that she could provide for the children in her home. But I want to explore some of those things with you. In their current placement in the Rios home, do the children have their own separate beds?
They have their own separate beds, yes.
And do the children have weather appropriate clothing and shoes in the Rios home?
Yes.
Does Ava attend school?
Yes.
And has she made friendships at school?
Yes.
And Lucas also has kind of been out and about and been able to make some friends as well, despite not being in school.
Yes.
Do they have foster siblings in the home, the biological children of Mr. and Mrs. Rios?
Yes.
Have you observed the relationship between the Rios's biological children and Ava and Lucas?
Yes.
What does that relationship appear to you?
A sibling relationship, very close.
And since they've been placed in the Rios's home for 13 months, have they established routines for their day-to-day lives?
Yes.
And do those routines include their counseling and visitation schedules?
Yes, they do.
How are the children doing in the Rios home?
I think they're doing wonderful.
Are you aware that there were some developmental delays at the time of removal?
Yes.
And have the children made significant improvements with those since they've been placed in the Rios home?
Yes.
If you had any concerns about the appropriateness or the bond of the family, would you recommend that the children be moved to a different home?
Yes.
Do you have those concerns?
No.
Is that why you're not recommending that the children be moved?
Correct.
I'll pass witness.
The department, would you agree with me that generally the department's position is that it's best to maintain family contacts when appropriate?
Yes.
And that includes extended family like cousins, aunts, uncles, etc.
Yes.
And you heard the testimony that Ms. Tate is able to do that for the children, correct?
Yes.
There's been some testimony about the 13 months that the children have been in this current placement. But if the department had acted quickly on the request for placement that occurred back in November, it wouldn't be 13 months, would it?
Objection, speculation, and relevancy.
Sustained.
I'll pass witness.
One
Ms.
question. So you're understanding this case is set for a final hearing on June 14th, 2023 at 9:30 a.m. in Stevens.
Yes.
Pass the witness.
Ms. Fowler.
Ms. Wood, do you feel like the department could have moved quicker in this case and made a determination a lot sooner than they did?
Objection, speculation, and relevancy.
Sustained.
It's absolutely relevant. Nothing further.
Ms. Barron.
Nothing further.
Your Honor, I just ask you to take into consideration the long-term effects that this would have on the children as far as being able to maintain a relationship with children, with family. I do believe that the timeline that occurred in this case was unusual in the sense that quite some time passed between a request regarding placement and then any type of decision regarding placement, which I think added to the situation. I would also ask that you take into consideration that Ms. Tate has been an approved placement for other children. There were no safety concerns noted in her home study, and I believe today we've addressed all the issues brought forth in the disposition by the department.
Thank you. Ms. Rush.
The parents like to talk about how the delay from November until the denial in March. home study was filed in December. Neither one of them asked for expedited staffing. More importantly, in April of 2022, according to the file, the home study on Vicky was denied. And by that time, Ms. Tate had already spoken to Annie in February and to Mr. Campbell in April. So the delay from April to November is solely on these parents. You also have the department's reasoning for not placing, including that Ms. Tate thinks Mr. Campbell's a good guy and he just makes bad choices. She's been giving him and Ms. Brown rides. And finally, while her CPA may read 26 Texas Admin Code Section 7492551 in one way, the department reads it another way. We ask that, considering we're going to trial in six weeks, after 13 months with this family, that you deny.
Thank you. Ms. Fowler?
I would just second what Ms. Smith had said. And also, I would like to point out that the concerns just lodged by Ms. Rush were not stated in any kind of disposition that was filed with the court in terms of the comments that Ms. Tate made about Mr. Campbell being a good guy or not a good guy. That was after the fact. So I would just like to point that out as well.
Thank you. Ms. Barron?
I would just ask that the court consider the bonds and the routines that have already been established with the children in their current home. And I would recommend that the court deny placement with Ms. Tate at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Navarro, as guardian ad litem, do you have a recommendation?
Yes, ma'am. I agree with the department and the attorney ad litem for the child.
Okay.
I believe that placement with Mrs. Tate should be denied.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate y'all's diligence in working with the timeline that we've had on this, and the court is going to deny placement with Ms. Tate. The court will note to Mr. Campbell and Ms. Brown that if you're unable to provide your children with a safe and stable home environment, your parental rights can still be restricted or terminated. And I would note for all parties, we are set for a final hearing in this matter on June the 14th of 2023 at 9:30. Ms. Smith, if you will provide an order for me, I would appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Best of luck.